Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone here to the fourth of my sort of book talks on Clear Light. This is a slightly earlier edition, Advice on Dying and Living a Better Life by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. A student has written, following the last session, asking for some explanation regarding what the I is, rather than what the person isn't, i.e. inherently existent. Though this is a very profound topic, it's a worthy question indeed. So I'll just note a few points. It's said that the realization of how things exist as mere imputations, which is to say nominally, is incumbent upon recognition that they don't exist in the way that they habitually appear to innate self-grasping ignorance, i.e. as existing from their own side. This becomes clear when Lama Tsongkhapa says in his middle-length Lam Rim, quote, "One may be apprehending the I to be inherently existent, or if one has understood the view of the middle way school, one may apprehend the I as only being nominally existent. So you can see here that apprehending how things exist as mere nominations or mere imputation by thought must be preceded by, and in this sense be supported by, a realization of emptiness, which thoroughly refutes inherent existence as the actual mode of existence of things. So it's therefore necessary, in reply to the question, that we follow this order of realization, because without understanding what it is that things are empty of, we can't hope to estimate how they might exist in a manner or in any sense other than this. As Chandrakirti famously points out, when a meditator arises from a realization of emptiness, what remains for them, when they're up from their cushion and they're looking around, is the appearance of things as illusion-like. So though inherently existent things have been thoroughly or utterly repudiated by an analysis in their meditation, investigating the final mode of existence of things, it would be wrong for that meditator, when they've got up from their cushion, to assert that nothing whatsoever is left over when that meditator then re-engages with the world. Indeed, to conclude such would mean that the realization of emptiness, in the case of this meditator, has led to a conclusion of nihilism, that if things are empty, nothing whatsoever exists at all. So Tsongkhapa makes these points comprehensively. In the Great Lam Rim, he says, and I quote, "Illusion is said to have two meanings. Statements that the ultimate truth is like an illusion, for instance, means that although it is established as merely existent, its true existence is negated. Statements that forms and such are illusions mean that whatever appear as a form, while being empty of intrinsic existence, is like an illusion. It is the latter of these that I'm concerned with here," says Tsongkhapa. "How do you establish this latter sense of illusion? You use two kinds of awareness," and I'm emphasizing two kinds of awareness. One that apprehends an appearance and one that ascertains emptiness. For example, how can you know that an appearance of a horse or an elephant is an illusory or false appearance? You need, says Tsongkhapa, both a visual consciousness that sees an illusory horse or elephant, and a mental consciousness that knows that the horse or elephant does not exist as it appears. Likewise, to be certain that the person, for instance, is an illusory or false appearance, you need both the undeniable appearance of the person to a conventional consciousness, that's one of the consciousnesses, and the ascertainment by reasoned knowledge, which is the other kind of mind, that the person is empty of essential intrinsic existence. And this is critical. Lama Tsongkhapa says reasoned knowledge, which is the one that realizes emptiness, does not establish that the appearance exists. All it establishes is that the object is empty of inherent existence and is technically called a non-affirming negative. Nothing else appears in its place. While conventional valid knowledge does not establish that it is empty of intrinsic existence. So you can see here that both these minds do very, very particular and separate work, if you like. So we must here appreciate that a conventional awareness is characterized by the fact that it does not investigate whether or not things exist in the way they appear to the mind. Says Tsongkhapa, quote, "Conventional knowledge refers to those types of cognitions that engage their objects, whatever they may be, as they appear to the mind. They do not inquire into the facts about whether what is perceived exists as only as it appears to the mind, or whether it really objectively exists in such a manner. Thus, they are those awarenesses that engage their objects without analysis." So you see how distinct these two minds are. Glossing the same point, Thupten Jinpa says, in the above, Tsongkhapa suggests that non-analysis here does not preclude conventional analysis, such as inquiring, for example, whether or not a jar is breakable, whether Tenzin goes to the market and so on. Clearly, even within such types of discourse, there is a difference between truth or falsity. As mentioned earlier, a perception of a face is true, while the perceptual illusion of seeing a mirror reflection of a face is not. So a reflection of a face isn't a real face. It's merely a reflection of a face. So he still make a distinction of truth and falsity within the realm or orbit, if you like, of conventionalities. Thus, Tsongkhapa contrasts the perspective of a non-analytical mind, which is the conventional mind, with the ultimate standpoint, the mind that penetrates to its final mode of existence and recognizes its emptiness. So if we fail to distinguish these two kinds of mind, or worse still, I might propose, collapse them together, compound them, mix and mess them up, we'll have no means by which to understand how things may be conventionally established by a conventional cognizer and yet also be found empty of existing from their own side. All up, our great challenge is to understand how dependent arising and emptiness are compatible, or how conventionally existent things, though merely imputed, can nonetheless function. Tsongkhapa indicates that this is the most subtle and therefore most difficult realization to obtain and requires extensive work. It might be the work of lifetimes, hence the need to navigate death skillfully so as to not interrupt the flow of our deepening investigation. So this is one of the purposes why we're studying death and death meditation, actually, is to give us a continuity of practice as our awareness, our probing awareness, if you like, into the nature of reality is extended and deepened across time. And also we meet with all the ancillary conditions of good body, healthy environment and so forth, and enables us to practice in order to accomplish our aims as a trainee bodhisattva. So on page 152 of our text, so we're returning to our root text, His Holiness says, in regards to analysing whether the body truly exists or not, I quote, If it does exist the way it appears, so concretely present, it should become clear, and clear under the light of analysing whether the body is any of its individual parts, or whether it is their sum, or whether it is something altogether different. This is how the analytical mind, analysing whether things exist inherently or not, proceeds. The closer you look, the more it is not found to exist in any of these ways. This is the case for all phenomena. The fact that you cannot find them under such an analysis means that they do not exist under their own power. They are not self-established. They do not inherently exist despite all appearances to the contrary. Still, His Holiness goes on, this does not mean that sentient beings and things do not exist at all. When rather they do not exist in the way they appear to so concretely exist. When you analyse and meditate well, you'll understand the harmony, the compatibility, if you like, even reconcilability between the actual appearance of persons and things and their emptiness of inherent existence. Without such understanding, emptiness and appearance seem to prohibit each other. They block each other, they obscure each other. We can't see how they could both be there, especially in the same place, if you like. So the following passage by Tsongkhapa from his very, very extraordinary book, Essence of Eloquence, summarizes really what I've attempted in my own way to at least venture to lay out in answer to that question. Things are merely labelled from the side of the mind perceiving them. But in trying to understand what it means for something to be merely imputed, and that's the question, wasn't it, we had at the beginning, we have to understand what it means for something to be empty. A name identifies something with specific qualities. It is just a label. A name identifies something, it's just a label. When we search for the real referent of that name amongst those qualities as something existing from its own side, can we find it? No. Neither the thing's qualities nor anything else is the referent of that name. There is nothing underlying what is merely labelled that holds its identity from its own side. A thing is merely imputed by thought and name. It is merely imputed from this side, the perceiver. It does not exist from its own side, the object, at all. These two things are absolutely contradictory. Tsongkhapa says, this is the view, prasangic view, of what it means to be not truly existent, not inherently existent, or not existent by way of its own nature. Everything is just imputedly existent. So I recommend a careful reading and study of pages 151 to 157 of our current text, because His Holiness discusses these sorts of issues there under the heading of realizing or realization of emptiness. So it's pivotal to our topic. So I hope you'll forgive me for rather extensively diverting at the very beginning. So I'd like to begin with the prayers and just to frame our motivation for the rest of the session. So taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create from listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I collect through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I collect from listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Omidam Guru Ratnam Nalakam Niriyatayam. So from last week, following from last week, we've now arrived at verse 7 of the poem by the Panchen Lama, which is the basis of His Holiness's commentary. And it says, may we have the confidence of joy and delight when food and wealth accumulated with miserliness are left behind, and we separate forever from cherished and longed for friends, going alone to a perilous situation. So as His Holiness indicates in his commentary, we're now dealing with the very juncture where our death is imminent. His Holiness explains how this is usually or ordinarily accompanied by being sorrowful, not only for yourself, but for friends and family. Moreover, the process of dying, the gradual withdrawal of consciousness, would take place within this sorrow. So we're talking about habitual experiences here. However, such immersion in a pervasive, overwhelming sorrow or grief is to be averted, and can be averted if, and quote His Holiness, we have reflected again and again on the instructions to be employed while dying. When this is the case, His Holiness says, all the appearances associated with death, instead of distracting you, remind you of the practice and urge you towards meditation. So I quoted this last couple of sentences in the session last week, but I thought it'd be very useful to remind us all. One is urged towards meditation, not because one is driven by fear, but because one has understood that sufferings, true sufferings, the first noble truth, can be overcome. We've established that in our studies and in our meditation prior to the death experience. And if they can be overcome, then we also have a foundation for even greater compassion for the plight of others. Thus we generate great compassion. So Chandrakirti famously talks about this, saying the very powerful form of compassion is motivated by an awareness that the suffering of the beings are undergoing is in fact able to be averted, but they don't recognize that, and therefore they are helpless and struggling without any goal or means of escape. So that is the source for us, looking at that situation of the greatest tenderness and wish to embrace their plight and work on their behalf, because we can see that with just some remedies, we can actually avert the causes of that cyclic existence. So His Holiness at this point of his commentary ushers in, I think, a remarkably tender image of a child returning home. His Holiness suggests that if we have a trained mind, we can actually overcome panic, regret, and sorrow at the death time. And so therefore the experience of entering into the phases of dying will be actually welcomed and greeted like a child greeting returning home. Isn't that amazing? And it also explains, of course, why Lama Zopa Rinpoche might call his book on this topic, How to Enjoy Death, what seems to be almost a scandalous proposition, but we can begin to see a very, very deep import in that description. So our ability to actually do all this is described or kind of structured by His Holiness according to 3 levels of practitioners. And so I'll quickly touch upon them. The first, amongst those who will go into an intermediate state between lives, the best practitioners can determine their next rebirth. Such a person can die with confidence and without any worries. This capacity for controlling one's rebirth requires advanced meditational realizations and yogic skills, such as being able to bring the winds into the central channel through the force of meditation, and then employ the subtle innate mind of clear light that arises to meditate on emptiness. So you can see the topic of emptiness is returned. This is, of course, a very advanced practitioner, someone who's engaged in the completion stages of Hatha Yoga Tantra. So he practiced towards that by the initial stages, preparatory stages, and so forth. A middling practitioner will not be frightened, so at least won't be frightened, and a lowest practitioner at least will not have any regret. Since you have, in this case, since you are prepared to be reborn in a meaningful way, being able to continue spiritual endeavour, there is no regret, depression or fright when death comes. Your consciousness can leave with great confidence. So at this point of his commentary, His Holiness introduces the remarkable topic of tukdam. And he's referring here to how practitioners can stay in the clear light of death in a most profound meditation for 1, 17, or even longer number of days. He says, as a sign of this, after their breathing has stopped, their bodies remained completely fresh, without the slightest foul odour, for all that time in this hot country. So he's referring to particular monks who have achieved this capacity of meditating on the clear light of death in this profound way. Such persons are able to remain without fluctuation in the mind of the clear light of death. And because of this, they can, or they have the capacity to die with great confidence and joy. His Holiness, under the auspices of what is being named the Tukdam project, which is conducted under the auspices of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Center for Healthy Minds, has asked scientists to investigate such cases. So far, the studies have been negative, but this is only because scientists have been unable to detect any discernible brain waves in the case of these meditators. But according to the Buddhist presentation of the final stages of the death process, as we shall see a little bit later in the session, such an outcome is not surprising, as in that presentation of the death process, all the subtle winds, or the energies, if you like, have withdrawn from the body and are resident in the indestructible drop in the center of the chakra of the heart. And so, technically speaking, there's no longer any brain activity. So if you're trying to measure something up there, you're not going to come up with anything. That doesn't mean there still isn't the innate clear light mind present in this very, very subtle kernel, if you like, of the chakra, the heart. So Thompson, a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, concluded, quote, if the thinking was that tukdam is something that we can measure in the brain, this study suggests that it's not the right place to look. And he adds, this doesn't prove that we can't measure it at all. So the scientific quest, in other words, continues. So we must remember here that checking for residual brain activity using instruments such as electroencephalograms is incapable of measuring consciousness itself. It is only capable of measuring electrical impulses that pertain to matter. And the Buddhists happily accept that the brain is no longer involved in tukdam as a seat for consciousness. As one of the researchers, Tani Tidwell, says, quote, "We're looking through layers of bone, muscle, flesh, tissue, trying to find a tool sensitive enough to detect something that residual. But most of our instruments aren't that subtle. But that doesn't mean that there is nothing there." So some of the more open-minded scientists are still keen to delve further. So therein is described the challenge for science and particularly neurological science. Currently, they're engaged, generally speaking, in a reductive analysis of physical reality, with the assumption that at some point, by going finer and finer and finer and finer and finer in detail, they're going to be left over with consciousness somehow lurking at the very base, subtle level of matter, or even submolecular, or even quantum. This is what's meant, so this is contradicted by the Buddhist idea that the mind is defined as what is clear and knowing. And this is going to empty out any notion of the mind being a physical entity. So I'm going to quote Geshe Rabten, who in his Mahamudra instructions clearly articulates what the mind is. One defining characteristic of the mind is its quality of being devoid of physical properties. There you go. It has no colour, no shape, and it cannot be touched. But its essence is not merely this lack of material content. Space too is clear and empty in this way, but it is not mind. The difference between the mind and space is that the former is a dynamic temporal phenomena that undergoes momentary change, whereas space is non-temporal and not subject to such change. The mind is always arising independent upon its preceding causes and conditions, which include both other states of mind and material phenomena. In addition to being clear and empty of any physical properties, it is in a state of transformation. Furthermore, this dynamic property of mind has the quality of cognition. That's what's meant by knowing. Cognition is a defining characteristic of the mind because it indicates that every one of its particular instances and states necessarily apprehends a specific object. This is something we can investigate for ourselves. We can see how every thought is a thought of something and every perception is a perception of a particular object. End of quote. So this is worth stressing. If we're confused on this point, we'll stand no chance of understanding the process of death, at least according to this extraordinary Buddhist presentation, and particularly the manner in which physical and mental phenomena can have a relationship without being subsumed to the same thing, the same entity. So we're now going to move to chapter 6 of His Holiness's book, and it's now dealing with meditating while dying. So you'll recall His Holiness's structural outline. I'll just quickly quote. The next 3 stanzas describe at length the appearances that occur during the first 4 stages of dying and how to meditate throughout them. This section calls on our knowledge of the collapse of the physical elements that support consciousness and their corresponding experiences. So at this point, it's useful, if we want further detail, to refer to this very, very excellent book by Lhasa Rinpoche and Geoffrey Hopkins, with the forward-based Holiness the Dalai Lama, called Death, Intermediate State and Rebirth. And I've also provided a PDF prepared by Ken Horter, who founded the Karuna Hospice in Brisbane in 1992, who has extracted some of the significant material, chart material that's found in this book in a sort of A4 format. It's very usable for us. So I recommend that we can use that chart, that PDF alongside. So I'm not going to attempt to toggle now because it's going to get too complicated, but just bear with me. The material is there in sort of concise form as a resource. So verse 8 says, may we generate a powerful mind of virtue when the elements earth, water, fire, and wind dissolve in stages and physical strength is lost, mouth and nose dry and pucker, warmth withdraws, breaths are gasped, and rattling sounds emerge. So His Holiness indicates that this verse marks the transition from the seven earlier verses, which were presented in accordance with both forms of Buddhist doctrine, Sutra and Tantra. His Holiness adds, the latter involves a special practice that calls for imagining yourself here and now as a fully compassionate and wise being with a physical form of a Buddha. So now, from the 8th stanza on, the presentation is mainly of tantric practices, specifically from the class of highest yoga tantra. So it's necessary to know that in order to gain some understanding of the incredible refinement of detail and the almost alternative universe of language and terminology that will now be ushered in, because we're dealing with a realm of description, if you like, of very subtle inner experience, which has no equivalent linguistically, even conceptually, in a Western kind of intellectual or academic landscape. We just haven't broached it. And so it's having to almost reinvent the way our languages are going to work to begin to even translate some of these extraordinary tantric texts. So His Holiness says that from the 8th verse on, we're having a description of death in terms of the gradual dissolution of body and mind and the 4 elements, according to Highest Yoga Tantra. After conception, a process of formation proceeds from subtler to grosser, conception at birth. But at death, there is a dissolution process from grosser to subtler. So it's the inverse of the process of emerging into a birth in a body like this one. In death, we exit through a reverse procedure, if you like. The phenomena that dissolve consist of the 4 elements, at least in the early stages: earth, referring to the hard substance of the body; water, referring to fluids; fire, referring to heat; and wind, referring to energy or movement. The dissolutions are described according to a gradual death as opposed to a sudden death, such as a violent trauma, being blown up in an explosion in a war zone, for example. So in a gradual death, His Holiness says, it's possible to recognise and utilise these different stages of the dissolution process. And we're now going to go into that in a little bit more detail. So it's going to be quite technical, but you'll see that you can work through it and gain a kind of an alternative landscape, which becomes very, very precious for navigating our own death experience. That's why we're doing this. So the last dissolutions refer to the collapse of consciousness into the innermost level of mind. So the first 4 refer to the collapse of the relatively gross elements, and the final 4 refer to grosser levels of consciousness collapsing or into more and more subtle levels of consciousness, culminating in the clear light of death, which is the most subtle mind that an ordinary being has. It becomes the substratum, not just of an ordinary being, but even of a Buddha, the enlightened mind itself. So it has incredible significance, this mind. So His Holiness adds in his explanation that these dissolutions don't just happen at death. In fact, he says, remember, they occur throughout daily life, but usually go unnoticed. These 8 phases proceed in forward order when dying, going to sleep, ending a dream, sneezing, fainting, and during orgasm. And in reverse order after the process of death completely ends, as well as when waking from sleep, when beginning a dream, when sneezing, fainting, and orgasm end. So the 8 stages are identified, says His Holiness, by way of visual content. But when we talk about visual content here, we're not referring to what can be seen with the eyes, because as we're going to understand from the description, there's going to be a point in the death process where the eyes cease to function. So the forward order of the signs is mirage, smoke, fireflies, flame of a lamp, the vivid white mind sky, the vivid red-orange mind sky, and clear light. So I'm using the translation by Hopkins here. It's the same presentation, just slightly different wording. And then the reverse order. This is referring to merging into a birth, for example, clear light, vivid black mind sky, vivid orange red mind sky, vivid white mind sky, flame of a lamp, fireflies, smoke, mirage. So these are sort of metaphorical descriptions, but they're actually trying to capture the actual nature of what is appearing to the mind. So we need to understand here what's meant by a dissolution. His Holiness says on page 121, in general, the grosser elements dissolve into the subtler. So the capacity of the former to serve as a support for consciousness degenerates. The latter becomes more manifest. So it's like a kind of collapsing stack. And as each level collapses, the level that is left at the top becomes prominent. Then it collapses and that level becomes prominent. So the root text presents this more elaborately, the root text that's translated in this book. The meaning of dissolution, with respect to how the former elements dissolve into the latter, the capacity of the wind associated with the former element in the list of earth, water, fire, and wind to act as a basis of consciousness is withdrawn, and the capacity of the latter one to do so becomes more manifest. This is called the dissolution of a former element into a latter one, and it is not a case of one element's becoming of the nature of another. So that earth dissolves into water means that the capacity of the earth wind to act as a basis of consciousness degenerates, whereupon the capacity of the water element, the second element to dissolve, which will dissolve, to act as a basis of consciousness becomes more manifest. Thus, since this is like a transference of the capacity of the former to the latter, it is said that earth dissolves into water, but it is not that ordinary earth dissolves into ordinary water. So this account applies to the other dissolutions. So it's not, talking about a dissolution here is not the same as we might talk about the dispersion of a cube of sugar in a cup of tea. Rather, it's a weakening of the energy required to support a particular level of consciousness. This will become clearer. But just to forecast, when the earth element or constituent dissolves, our form body can no longer support the operation of the eye sense, and thus our capacity to access its dedicated visual objects, namely colours and shapes collapses. In other words, though we might, technically speaking, still have eyes, we can no longer see. Likewise, together with the dissolution of the earth element, the basic mirror-like wisdom collapses in the sense that it can no longer successfully function. So we'll go into these details a little bit more. But we tend to think of reality sitting out there, don't we? Waiting to be apprehended, as it were. But when we study the death process, we realise that what we call both internal and external reality are merely constructions involving a concatenation or series of interconnected, interlocked operations and things. As Nagarjuna, Buddhapalata, Chandrakirti, Aryadeva, and other great learned masters indicate, there is no meaningful way we can talk about a visual object existing from its own side independently of vision, that is, being seen. If there was, it could be seen without the faculty of an eye, without an eye consciousness, or more generally, without a seer, one who sees. Why? Because an inherently existent seen object would be a seen object irrespective of whether or not it was actually being seen. This is because it would exist as seen by way of its own nature. So you can see here we're actually getting introduced to the way in which reality, so-called, our conventional reality, is actually structured, constructed by us in a very extraordinary, profound way. So this analysis, of course, applies to all sensory objects: sound, smells, taste, and touch. So what the process of the dissolution exposes, or sort of reveals, if you like, is the way in which a sense object exists independent on a sense consciousness, which exists in turn in dependence on a sense organ or faculty, or rather that each requires the other to be found to exist conventionally in order to operate at all. So in other words, if we take one of these elements away of this sort of network, the entire system collapses. We can't present it. So the experience of the dying person unfold as these networks of interdependent things or systems collapse in layers, as it were, corresponding to the serial collapsing of consciousness from grosser into increasingly subtler states, as His Holiness has indicated. So His Holiness presents a precise account of each of the first four dissolutions, and I'm simply going to read them to you because they're already incredibly concise and I can't hope to sort of further summarize them. So the earth element, first of all, degenerates and dissolves into the water element. The solid aspects of the body, such as bone, are no longer capable of serving as a mount or foundation for consciousness. The capacity of the solid aspects to do so dissolves into, or is transferred to, the fluids of the body, such as blood and phlegm. Now the capacity of the water element to act as a base of consciousness becomes more manifest. Your body becomes dramatically thinner and your limbs loosen. You lose physical strength. The vitality and luster of the body is radically reduced or diminished, leaving it worn out. Your sight becomes dark and unclear. You can no longer open or close your eyes. Of course, these are exterior signs that a witness of a dying person can actually apprehend. You may have a sense, let's talk about the dying person, of sinking into the earth or under mud, and you may even call out, "Hold me up," or tempt to struggle upward. But it is important, says His Holiness, not to fight. Remain calm within a virtuous attitude. What you see in your mind looks like a mirage, kind of shimmering. So a close comparative reading will reveal that His Holiness is utilising exactly the same text by the 18th century scholar Yang Zhenghao Lodro, who wrote a text called Lamp, thoroughly illuminating the presentation of the three basic bodies, death, intermediate state and rebirth, which functions as the root source of Lhasa Rinpoche's commentary also. So in that text, there are extra details relating to the basic wisdoms relating to each of the dissolutions. So I mentioned the basic mirror-like wisdom before. This is defined as an ordinary consciousness to which many objects appear simultaneously, just as reflections appear in a mirror. So that cognitive capacity to have an awareness of many things at once, as does or do objects appear to a mirror, collapses. So phase 2, the capacity of the water element degenerates and dissolves into the fire element. The warmth that maintains the body and the fire element's capacity to serve as a basis of consciousness is enhanced. You no longer experience feelings of pleasure and pain or even neutral feelings associated with the senses and the mental consciousness. Your mouth, tongue and throat dry due to the loss of saliva, and scum forms on the teeth. Other fluids such as urine, blood, regenerative fluid and sweat dry up. You can no longer hear sounds and the usual hum in the ear stops. What you see in your mind looks like puffs of smoke or thin smoke pervading a room, or smoke billowing from a chimney. So again, if we refer to the root text translated here, we can understand that there are 5 phenomena that disintegrate simultaneously at the level of the dissolution of the aggregate of feeling. So we can see this very clearly from the charts that are available in the text. So I've sent them to you. So the wisdom of equality is involved here, and this dissolves at this stage, and it's defined as an ordinary consciousness that is mindful of pleasure, displeasure, and neutral feelings. Phase 3. Again, the 5 phenomena on the level of the aggregate of discrimination dissolve simultaneously. Simultaneous means the whole system collapses together. The root text says that as an external sign of the dissolution of the aggregate of discriminations, one is no longer mindful of the affairs of close persons, even of one's parents. So you see here how our cognitive capacity is withdrawing from its engagement, not just with the world, which we moved around in, but our own internal capacity to walk around our experiential world, the one that we've constructed through our experience. So in phase 3, again, the root text discrimination dissolves simultaneously. The root text says that an external sign of the 3 I mentioned before, one is no longer mindful of the affairs of close persons such as one's parents. And at this point, the wisdom of analysis dissolves. So I've repeated that section accidentally. The wisdom of analysis dissolves at this point, and that's an ordinary consciousness that is mindful of the individual names, purposes, and so forth of close persons. As a sign of its dissolution, one can no longer remember the names, even of one's parents. So His Holiness says the capacity of the fire element degenerates and dissolves into the wind element. The currents of air, or energy that direct various bodily functions, such as inhalation, exhalation, burping, spitting, speaking, swallowing, flexing the joints, stretching and contracting the limbs, opening and closing the mouth and eyelids, digestion, urination, defecation, menstruation, and ejaculation. Collapse. The warmth of the body diminishes, resulting in an inability to digest food. If you have conducted your life predominantly without virtue, the bodily warmth initially gathers downward from the top of the head to the heart, the upper body becoming cold first. But if you have lived predominantly virtuously, warmth gathers from the soles of the feet upwards towards the heart, and the lower body becomes cold first. The ability to smell ceases. You can no longer pay attention to the activities and wishes of friends and relatives around you, or even remember their names. You experience difficulty breathing, exhalations becoming longer and longer, and inhalation shorter and shorter. Your throat emits rattling or gasping sounds. And the root text here, which I quoted before quoting His Holiness, says that breaths are as if piled one on top of the other. So His Holiness says that what you see with your mind looks like fireflies, perhaps inside smoke, or like sparks in the soot at the bottom of a metal pan when we're roasting barley. Phase 4. After that, the 5 phenomena on the level of the aggregate of compositional factors dissolve simultaneously. The external sign of the dissolution of this aggregate is that one can no longer perform physical actions such as moving about. So one's lost all capacity to move the body. And at this point, the basic wisdom of achieving activities collapses. And this is defined as a consciousness that is mindful of worldly external activities, purposes, and so forth, of this and future lives, as well as how to achieve them. As an external sign of its dissolution, one is no longer mindful of these. So as an external sign of the dissolution of the wind element, the 10 winds, the gross life bearing wind and so forth, shift from their abodes to the heart, and the breath ceases to move in and out. As an external sign of the dissolution of the tongue sense power, the tongue becomes thick and short, and its root turns blue. As an external sign of the dissolution of the tastes included within one's own continuum, one can no longer experience the 6 tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, astringent, pungent, and salty. Since at this point the body sense power and touches must also dissolve, as an external sign of their dissolution, one can no longer experience any smoothness or roughness. So no capacity to understand texture, for example. So the fact that breathing ceases at this point sort of brings us to the point where, from a Western medical perspective, we could begin to talk about clinical death, although, of course, clinical death is also going to wish to make sure that there is no brain activity as well. So also it might wish to look at whether or not there's any cardiac heart activity. So it can be a very complex issue defining what death is, even from a Western perspective. But we're reached a point where there's no breath functioning and probably no registerable brain activity, and also no heartbeat. So these become, and I'm just going to touch on this subject, it's a very interesting one, but a very tricky one, has some bearing on what it means in terms of organ transplants as well, because if we're going to have a kind of a interpretive idea of when the actual liminal moment of death occurs, we need to be very precise. And so it becomes a fascinating topic for investigation. So at this point of when the winds have come into the the heart. What you see with your mind is like the flame of a butter lamp or a candle, or like the flickering light of a butter lamp or a candle. At first it flickers, and then when the winds on which the mental conceptions ride begin to collapse, the flame or the appearance of the flame becomes steady. So let's just, I realize that's a lot of material, and I'm really just throwing it out there, but we can have a general kind of account of what significance it has. We must allow, firstly, says His Holiness, for variations of this description according to individual internal experiences of different people. His Holiness says, in general, the body of a human is composed of the four elements. However, due to variations in the channels and winds within this framework, different people experience internal signs during the process of dissolution differently, slightly differently. And we might also suggest here that it's one of the reasons why we also have a number of Hatha Yoga Tantras which have slight variations in the way the winds and channels and so forth that describe the subtle body, if you like, because they have, we have a predetermined karmic link to particular tantras. In other words, our capacity attunes more closely to some tantras than others because of the way in which our own bodies, in this lifetime at least, are constituted. So that's worth bearing in mind. However, His Holiness says that even when the internal factors are the same, the internal signs of dying appear to the mind in different ways according to different emphases on the body. So I just mentioned that. So the critical thing here is emphasized by His Holiness, which is to look at our mind. He says, every moment that we engage in actions motivated by ignorance contributes to living in cyclic existence. Very strong actions can propel not just one, but many lives in cyclic existence. So His Holiness here is talking about karma. If we generate very powerful negative minds during this dissolution process, the gross dissolution process that I've been describing, we have the capacity to trigger karma, which will throw us into very difficult states. If, on the other hand, we can generate very virtuous states of mind, such as love and compassion and a kind of untroubled, peaceful mind, then we'll have the alternative capacity to generate or ripen positive throwing karma. So I haven't got time to sort of detail the nature of throwing karma, but it's clearly a very important topic, and we can refer to the classic Lam Rim presentations to get more detail. So we're now up to stanza 9, and I quote, "May we realize the deathless mode of being, when various mistaken appearances frightful and horrible, and in particular mirage, smoke, and fireflies appear, and the mounts of the 80 indicative conceptions cease." So His Holiness indicates again in his commentary how, when the four elements dissolve, various appearances occur. He expands, sometimes even before the eye and ear cease to function, unusual sights and sounds appear, and always various visions appear to mental consciousness. So in other words, we should expect these sorts of visionary processes to occur during the death process. And that's one of the reasons why we learn to recognize these four primary ones, because they enable us to, if you like, navigate the death process in a volitional way. Not so we can reverse it, but we can actually ride on the increasingly subtle minds that are appearing, and we use the appearance of the different mirage and so forth images to work out where we are in the death process, so that we can anticipate the innate mind of clear light and then utilize it in the most profound possible meditation. That's really the goal. So verse 10, may we generate strong mindfulness and introspection when the wind constituents begin to dissolve into consciousness, when the wind constituent begins to dissolve into consciousness, and the external continuum of breath ceases, coarse dualistic appearances dissolve, and the appearance like a burning butter lamp dawns. So some further explanation is perhaps needed here, because we're moving beyond the realm of ordinary, everyday lived experience. His Holiness, first in dealing with this verse, gives an account of the nature of consciousness, namely, what it means to say that it is clear and knowing. For example, consciousness can be said to apprehend its objects even when it does not know them properly, said His Holiness. So I've already introduced this idea of consciousness being composed of moments rather than cells, atoms and particles and so forth. So I won't expand more here. Likewise, I also introduced during this first session, the way in which the mind can only be produced from a substantial cause that is similar to the effect. This means, for example, that a brick, which is a material thing, cannot give rise or birth to a moment of consciousness. This is because the cause and the effect in this case are not compatible. You'll also recall that we can present a logical proof of beginningless mind, and thus reincarnation, once we accept that any moment of consciousness requires a preceding moment of consciousness for its substantial cause. So His Holiness covers these points. So I'm referring to page 139 of the text. So there's a caveat mentioned by His Holiness at this point of the commentary. Even though mind and matter are substantially different, this doesn't mean that they can't or don't interact. Understanding this is essential if we're to understand more deeply the death process, and particularly the increasingly subtle death process. What we're to understand is that while dissimilar substantial entities, matter can still act, says His Holiness, as a cooperative cause for consciousness rather than as its substantial cause. So this becomes clearer when we look at some examples. When the subtle matter inside the orb of the eye acts as a cooperative condition of visual consciousness, or when a shape or colour acts as a cooperative condition of visual consciousness, such as this object, a book, or when your own body acts as a support or a base for consciousness itself. This interaction can also be the other way, whereby consciousness shapes matter. I'm using that sort of in a poetic sense, really, since it is our actions or karma motivated by consciousness that structure our environment. We can recall here that one of the four karmic results is called the environmental result, the other three being the ripening result, the causally concordant habitual result, and the cause concordant experiential result. So these are topics that we find elaborated extensively in the Lam Rim presentation. So His Holiness notes that according to highest yoga tantra, consciousness rides on wind that is physical, though in its subtlest forms, wind is not composed of particles. This points towards the great potency of highest yoga tantra, which is that by manipulating the subtle winds that flow in the channels of the body, the subtle body, we can adjust or shift the types of consciousness that are arising. In conclusion, we can say that the wind and mind are one differentiable entity. So even in the case of the most subtle mind of clear light, there's said to be a subtle underlying energy base, if you like. And these two are always twinned. They travel together. And when one becomes fully enlightened, this is why we say that a Buddha is all pervasive. There is no phenomena that isn't seen or able to be apprehended by that enlightened consciousness. So that becomes a very extraordinary topic to pursue. So an enlightened being, in other words, can manifest a body with subtle wind as its substantial cause, a body in this exceptional case that is beyond physical particles, as is the case of a Buddha's complete enjoyment body in a Pure Land. So there's a further caveat given by His Holiness. He says that although consciousness can separate from the physical body, as it does when we pass from one lifetime to another, consciousness can never separate from the subtlest level of wind. So I apologize for being so intricate here in the presentation, but it's necessary to bear with the detail, as otherwise we won't be positioned to understand the death process beyond the dissolution of the four gross elements. Indeed, as an ordinary witness of a dying person, we cannot determine the dying person's experience. We cannot determine the dying person's experience beyond the point of the four gross dissolutions. The reason being that it's now occurring within the realm of the inner subjective experience of the dying person themselves. It's no longer available to us. His Holiness says, when wind or the energy on which the various levels of consciousness ride become very weak and dissolve more fully into consciousness, subtler and subtler levels of mind manifest. So he's referring now to the second set of four dissolutions. At the beginning of the fourth phase, when the wind that serves as the mount of the many attitudes begins to dissolve, there appears to the mind an image like the flame of a butter lamp or a candle, flickering at first and then steady. So we've dealt with that. So at this point, the breath ceases. The world generally considers this the moment of death, though from a Buddhist perspective, technically the moment of death comes later. So His Holiness says that if we're able to be mindful at death, recognizing the signs of the stages of dissolution, maintaining introspection enough to arrive at whatever of virtue you know, your practice will be very powerful, and at the very least, it will positively affect your next life. So we're now up to stanza 12. May we know our own nature ourselves. Through the yoga, realizing cyclic existence and nirvana as empty, when appearance increase and near attainment dissolve, the earlier into the latter, and experiences like pervasive moonlight, sunlight, and darkness dawn. So this stanza has the outline given by His Holiness, which is, these dissolutions and their corresponding experiences gradually open the way to three deeper, subtler minds to manifest, as described in the following stanzas. So this chapter in the book describes this process in great detail. So we're now dealing with the four final phases of the death process. And to understand the processes involved, His Holiness says that it's essential to understand the levels of consciousness as well as the structure of the channels, winds, and drops of essential fluids within the body. This is important tantric physiology and psychology, end of quote. So I can't hope to do that in the space of my talk today, but to gain a more detailed account of the structure of the channels in the body, we can refer to pages 138 to 41. For the structure of the winds in the body, we can refer to pages 141 to 144, and for detail on the drops, we can refer to 145. So there are three divisions of consciousness here. On the gross level, we have the five sense consciousnesses pertaining to the specific sphere of activity, colours and shapes, sounds, odours, tastes, and tactile experience. No problem there. Then we have a subtle but still gross level, which includes the three classes corresponding to the three types of wind, strong, middling, and weak, on which the three classes of consciousness arrive. And later on, we're going to be dealing with the very subtle. So you'll recall in verse 9, we had the words, may we realize the deathless mode of being, when various mistaken appearances, frightful and horrible, and in particular mirage, smoke, and fireflies appear, and the mounts of the 80 indicative conceptions cease. So after the wind element, the fourth gross element dissolves into consciousness, thus inaugurating the next dissolution, a large set of conceptions together with their accompanying or supporting winds that are their mount collapse. And these conceptions are classified as the 80 indicative conceptions. A full description of the entire set of 80 is given in Death, Intermediate State and Rebirth on pages 39 to 42. So to brutally summarize, 33 are indicative of the mind of white appearance, 40 are indicative of red increase, and 7 of black near attainment. These appearances of white appearance, red increase, and black near attainment, therefore, must be understood as the unfolding signs that occur internally to the dying person. This is beyond the dissolution of the elements. So let's go into a little detail. The fifth dissolution, Yangjeng Gawe Lodro says, the mind of the 8 indicative conceptions and the wind that serves as its mount must dissolve prior to the radiant white appearance, because its mode of apprehension and that of the mind of appearance are discordant. Also, since there is a great difference of coarseness and subtlety between these two, coarse minds such as those of the 80 conceptions cannot exist at the time of the white appearance. So we have this emptying out, increasing power and subtlety, if you like, of our capacity to have conceptual activity or awareness as we enter these later stages. Within the 8 indicative conceptions, as well as the wind that serves as their mount, within the 8 indicative conceptions, as well as the wind that serves as their mount, begin to dissolve into the mind of radiant white appearance, we have the appearance of a butter lamp. And this gives way. So you might have wondered, we seem to be confusing that there, but we're not. We first have the appearance of the butter lamp, and this gives way to the dawning of an extreme clarity and vacuity, as well as of light with a white aspect, like a night sky pervaded by moonlight in the autumn when the sky is free of defilement. So there's a physiological explanation here. With respect to the cause of such appearance, all the winds in the right and left channels above the heart have entered the central channel through the upper opening at the top of the head. Through the force of this, the knot of the channels at the top of the head is loosened, and since the white drop obtained from the father, which has the aspect of a white syllable hum upside down, has the nature of water, it comes downward. When it arrives on top of the 6-circled knot of the heart, of the right and left channels at the heart, the radiant white appearance arises. Thus, it is not a case of an appearance of moonlight and so forth shining from outside. It is called appearance because an appearance like moonlight dawns, and it's called empty because of being empty of the 80 conceptions as well as the wind that serves their mount. So what we're to hold here is that we're now exclusively describing the subtlest levels of consciousness, because we've moved utterly beyond the sphere of operational realm of all conceptual and thus sort of coarse dualistic mental activity. So His Holiness says, when the winds on which all 80 of these conceptions ride collapse, the conceptions also dissolve. This allows 3 subtle levels of consciousness to manifest in this order. Minds of white appearance, vivid white appearance, vivid red-orange appearance, and vivid black appearance. So we've already given a concise account of the fifth dissolution, which so we're now going to move on to the sixth, which corresponds to the mind of radiant white appearance, and then the seventh, which refers to the mind of radiant red increase, and the eighth, which refers to the radiant black near attainment. And this in turn will dissolve into the clear light of death. So I'll quickly go through this. So after the mind of white appearance, the mind of appearance as well as the wind that serves as mount dissolves into the mind of increase. When the mind of increase dawns, a red or orange appearance, empty and vacuous, but much clearer than before, shines like an autumn sky, free of defilement and pervaded by sunlight. With respect to its cause, all the winds in the right and left channels below the heart have entered the central channel through its lower opening at the base of the spine or in the sex organ. Through the force of this, the knot of the channel wheel in the jewel, the sex organ, and the knot of the channel wheel, the navel, gradually loosen. Thereby, the red drop that is obtained from the mother that exists in the form of a single vertical line of a short syllable A in Sanskrit comes upward until it arrives below the six-circled knot of the right and left channels at the heart. A red or orange appearance arises. And again, this is not a case of an illumination of sunlight and so forth shining from outside. It is called increase of appearance because of being very vivid like sunlight, and the very empty because of being devoid of the mind of appearance, as well as the wind that serves as its mount. The seventh dissolution. After that, the mind of increase, together with the wind that serves as its mount, dissolves into the mind of near attainment. During the first part, there dawns a vacuous black appearance, like an autumn sky free of defilement and pervaded by the thick darkness of the beginning of night. And so physiologically, the upper and lower winds inside the central channel have gathered within that channel at the heart. And through the force of this, the six-circled knot of the right and left channels at the heart is loosened. Thereupon, the white drop that is above, in the aspect of the syllable hum, upside down, descends, and the white drop that is below, in the aspect of the vertical line, ascends. These enter into the middle of the white and red indestructible drops that exist in the center of the heart chakra in the manner of a closed case. It's an analogy. Due to their meeting, the radiant appearance of near attainment arises. Thus, it is not a case of the appearance of darkness and so forth coming from outside. It is called near attainment because of being near the clear light. So it's approximating the subtlety of the clear light mind. And it's also called the great empty because of being devoid of the mind of increase as well as the wind that serves as its mount. So the first part of the mind of near attainment is accompanied by a sense of the object, but during the latter part, one is not mindful of any object, as if swooning unconsciously, confounded in darkness. Then all the winds and minds that adventitiously arise from this very subtle wind and mind cease. So this is when we have the radiant black vacuity dawning. So the eighth dissolution, the final dissolution, when the mind of near attainment dissolves into the clear light, the second portion of the mind of near attainment that is without mindfulness is cleared away. Without even the slightest coarse dualistic appearance, an appearance of very clear vacuity arises, dawns. It is like the natural colour of a dawn sky in autumn, free of the three conditions of pollution, moonlight, sunlight, and darkness. So it's emptied of those three earlier visions. This appearance is like that of a consciousness in meditative equipoise, realizing emptiness. So this affinity is what lends us as meditators to utilizing this mind to actually realize emptiness, because it's the closest of an ordinary mind, if you like, if we're ever going to get to realizing emptiness naturally. So we sort of push it into the realization through the force of our meditational awareness. So with respect to the cause of the clear light appearance, the white and red drops dissolve respectively into the white and red indestructible drops at the heart, and all the winds inside the central channel dissolve into the very subtle life-bearing wind. Through this, the very subtle wind and mind that have existed in the ordinary state from the beginning in a non-manifest state are made manifest, whereby such an appearance dawns. So again, it's not the case of an appearance of vacuous sky appearing from outside. This is called the clear light of death and the all empty, because of being devoid of the 80 conceptions and of appearance, increase and near attainment, as well as the winds that serve as their mouths. It is actual death from a Buddhist perspective. So this is called the basic truth body, so called because it is the basis of purification from a meditational stance to be transformed into the truth body of an enlightened being. And the vacuity is called the basic nature body, and the mind that takes as its object, and the mind that takes it as its object is called the basic realizational truth body. So most ordinary beings might remain in the state of clear light for up to 3 days, whereupon the signs of the white and red constituents reappear. So everyone goes through the reverse stages in order to enter the intermediate state. So we're not going to tackle that at all, but it is covered in the book. So His Holiness does mention at this point, though, in his commentary that if the body is ravaged by disease and we die in the ravaged body, it's very unlikely that we're going to remain in that state, naturally speaking, for very long at all in ordinary circumstances. So Yungjin Goalodro says, these stages of death are brought within the path by the practice of taking death as the truth body in the stages of generation and completion of highest yoga tantra. So this is the purpose of studying this topic. They are also the main bases of purification by means of the metaphoric and actual clear light. So His Holiness says, for a capable practitioner, this is a very valuable opportunity to practice. Those who are conscious of the mind of clear light can remain in this state for longer periods and, depending on previous training, can even use it to realize the truth of emptiness, of inherent existence of all phenomena, including cyclic existence and nirvana. So His Holiness then proceeds to give an account of how he might realize emptiness, and which commences on page 151 of the book, but regrettably for reasons of time, we can't pursue that further here. But I'd like to quote His Holiness's conclusion to this section. He says, here in the stages of dying, you seek to take this ultimate nature of phenomena, the emptiness of inherent existence, as the object of the subtler, more powerful minds, and concentrate single-pointedly upon it. Through this yoga, you'll know your own ultimate nature. Of the two natures, conventional and ultimate, you are taking to mind the ultimate, the absence of inherent existence. So, for reasons of auspiciousness and also because I'm conscious of time, I'd like to quickly quote stanzas 12 and 13 of the Panchen Lama's powerful yogic poem, especially as they indicate the manner in which the clear light generated by the meditator can meet in the sense of fuse or becoming separable with the actual clear light of death. So this is a moment of immense yogic achievement and is to be celebrated. Moreover, it is one of which we are ourselves capable if we appropriately train. So this is directly indicated by the fact that the verse 13 is set as a petitioning prayer. May we be. So we're making a prayer for this to actually occur. So in this way, the last stanzas of the poem function as a powerful dedication for any benefits that might have arisen during our own brief time of sharing this topic to go towards these wonderful ends. So according to His Holiness's outline, stanzas 12 and 13, which are dealt with in chapter 8 of the book, address the culminating experience of the fundamental innate mind of clear light. And this innermost level of mind is the basis of all conscious life. Verse 12, may the mother and child clear light meet, when near attainment dissolves into the all empty, and all conceptual multiplication cease, and an experience like an autumn moon free from polluting conditions dawns. Verse 13, may all be set in one-pointed profound meditation in the exalted wisdom of joined innate bliss and emptiness. During the four empties, upon the melting of the moonlight white constituent by the fire of the lightning-like powerful female, referring to tummo practice. So His Holiness concludes, according to High Ashoka Tantra, there is no mind more subtle than the mind of clear light. It serves as the basis of all appearances of samsara and nirvana. This is an extraordinarily profound point. A little later, His Holiness encapsulates in a few sentences the profound purposes of our study of the death processes, and I quote, in the final phase of dying, when all the coarse consciousnesses dissolve into the all empty, which is the clear light or fundamental innate mind, the myriad objects of the world, as well as the concepts such as sameness and difference, have been pacified in this subtlest mind. All appearances of environments and beings have withdrawn of their own accord. If you are able to transform the clear light of death into a fully qualified spiritual consciousness, the mind recognizes its own face, its own nature, the entity of the fundamental mind. So this invokes the opening line of verse 12, which says, may the mother and child clear lights meet. As young Jengoe Lodro says, quote, the clear light of death is the mother clear light, whereas that which dawns through the power of meditation during sleep and the waking state while on the spiritual path is called the sun clear light. Meditation that mixes these two during the clear light of death is called mixing the mother and sun clear lights. So His Holiness therefore asks us to actively and skillfully pursue such powerful and profound mixings, which represent very real yogic achievements. His Holiness says, as a practitioner, we must seek to go beyond ordinary emptiness, this mere absence of conventional appearances. When the clear light dawns, seek to realize the extraordinary emptiness of inherent existence with the mind of clear light itself. This will not come through exertion at the time of clear light itself. This is a really important point. But it arises through the force of familiarity gained prior to the phases of dissolution, and from the strong mindfulness of emptiness during the dawning of the three minds of white, red, and black appearance. This confirms, says His Holiness, the importance of continual training. So I was reading an interview with one of His Holiness's translators recently, and he mentioned that His Holiness had said to him that he dies 6 times a day. meaning that he practices these profound practices 6 times a day as part of his 6-session Guru Yoga practice. So he's on pages 162 to 163 of the book, the text we've been looking at together. His Honours gives a number of very sort of inspiring personal examples of his own personal efforts in this regard. And the point is that we're obviously to seek to do likewise. So within the extraordinary instructions, so I'm concluding the session now, without the extraordinary instructions of our holy gurus, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, how can such practices be even conceivable, yet alone be practiced and accomplished? So I thought by way of conclusion to quote an account of the passing away of the 9th Dalai Lama in 1815. Aged just 9, he had contracted a cold while presiding over the Great Prayer Festival. And the following is from Glenn Mullen's wonderful book, The 14 Dalai Lamas, A Sacred Legacy of Reincarnation. So to quote, commenting on his passing, his biographer, Demo Tulku Ngawang Losang Tupten Jigme Gutso writes, in order to inspire thoughts of Dharma in the minds of trainees who still held to the things of this life being permanent, and to demonstrate the glorious nature of the spiritual tradition, he began to show signs of passing during the 2nd Tibetan month of the Wood Boar year. Denmo Tulku goes on to say that at one point the boy sat upright, his breath became extremely subtle, and he appeared to enter into the death state, seeming to immerse himself in the clear light Dharmakaya of death, to pause there a while, and then to emanate the illusion-like Sambhogakaya. However, some moments afterwards, his breathing returned to normal. Numerous devotees went to him, bowed at his feet, and begged him not to go. O compassionate master, they said, please think of us living beings and of the Buddha Dharma. Please remain in the world for our sakes. Look on us with compassion. And if for some higher reason you must leave and go elsewhere for a time, please give us your promise that you will return. The boy looked at them and said, I had hoped to do more in this lifetime for the enlightenment tradition, to be of greater benefit to living beings. However, I'm not able to accomplish more than what has already been done. I offer prayers that in future lives I'll be able to be of greater benefit to the Buddha Dharma and to living beings. Having said these words and having dictated a message for the Manchu emperor, he smiled and looked up at the sky. Shortly after that, it was the midday of the 16th day of the 2nd Tibetan month. He crossed his legs in meditation position, folded his hands in his lap, and sat up straight. For a session, he engaged in the Tantric meditation known as Vajra recitation, occasionally seeming to pause and look towards the sky. Demo Tulku writes, like this, he continued the 3 cycles tantric breathing until he gradually induced the experience of clear light consciousness. He then allowed the subtle elements of his body to dissolve. First, the sign of mirage came, then an appearance like wispy smoke, then sparks like fireflies at night, and then an awareness like the light of an undisturbed battle lamp. After that came the 4 emptiness experiences, beginning with the appearance like a cloudless sky, until the 4th emptiness arose, the great radiance of the primordial clear light mind. He retained this primordial clear light mind and blended it with the Dharmakaya Buddha wisdom, thus manifesting the full and complete Dharmakaya mind. He rested for a while in this blissful state, and then once more manifested a Nirmanakaya form to bring benefits into the world. Thus he passed away without expressing the slightest fear or discomfort. This is the manner of his death, according to the description afforded by his tutor and biographer, Demo Tulku Ngawang Lobsang Tupten Jigme Gatso, who sat with him throughout the experience. So in the union of bliss and emptiness, His Holiness's explanation of the Lama Chopa practice, His Holiness comments on the vital verse 115 of the Lama Chopa, which says, having thus been entreated, pray grant this request, O Supreme Gurus, so that you might bless us, happily alight on the crown of my head, and once again set your radiant feet firmly at the corolla of my lotus heart. And His Holiness comments, one must fervently pray to the Guru by taking Guru Yoga practice as the life of the path. Through this practice and the path, one can actualize the pure illusory body and the meaning clear light, the factors that lead the practitioners to the resultant Buddhahood. Therefore, the followers of Lama Tsongkhapa traditionally take the practice of Guru Yoga as the life of the path and undertake a practice which integrates the three deities, Guya Samaja, Yamataka, and Taruka. So this absorption has been described of the Guru into the corolla of our lotus heart directly blesses and empowers our capacity to work with this blissful, clear light mind, inseparable from emptiness, in a direct experiential fashion, while also preparing us for the arising and utilization of the innate clear light mind that will rise naturally at the point of the final dissolutions connected to an actual death process, and thus may be then utilized by the experienced meditator to make great progress towards enlightenment. So hence we can make strong prayers, never to be separated from our holy teachers, so that we might also actualize the entire path to enlightenment for the benefit of all our suffering mothers. And so I'm now going to recite the final verses of the Panchen Lama's poem, which are actually structured as aspirational, dedicational prayers. So His Holiness says the last four stanzas describe the intermediate state after death and before the next life and show how to react. They detail how various levels of practitioners can direct their ensuring rebirth. So there's more yogic activity to be described. 14, may we complete in place of the intermediate state the concentrated meditation on illusion, so that upon leaving the clear light, we rise in a body of complete enjoyment, blazing with the glory of the Buddha's marks and beauties, arisen from the mere wind and mind of the clear light of death. 15, if due to karma an intermediate state is established, may erroneous appearances be purified through immediately analysing and realising the absence of inherent existence of the sufferings of birth, death, and in the intermediate state. 16, maybe we be born in a pure land through the yoga of transforming the external, internal, and secret through various signs, 4 sounds of the reversal of the elements, 3 frightful appearances and uncertainties appear. 17, may we be reborn with the supreme life support of a tantric practitioner using the sky, or the body of a monastic or lay practitioner possessing the 3 practices. And may we complete the realizations of the path of the 2 stages of generation and completion, thereby obtaining quickly a Buddha's bodies, truth, complete enjoyment, and emanation. So His Holiness concludes his account. Together, these 17 stanzas present the full scope of preparation for death by removing unfavourable conditions, gaining favourable conditions, learning how to engage in spiritual practice while dying, learning how to handle the intermediate state between lives, and influencing the subsequent rebirth. So with that, we'll dedicate together. Thank you. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase forevermore. Pray for long life for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And to Kabje Dzogchen Rinpoche, you who uphold the subdual's moral way, who serve as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunat's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honouring the three jewels, save of myself and others your disciples, please, please live long. So it's been a delight having this opportunity, and I know I've put out a huge amount of material tonight, but I'm really just inviting you in to the incredibly profound study of this topic from a practitioner's point of view, and particularly a tantric practitioner's point of view, but even from a very sort of beginning position, we gain so much material to be able to approach our death with a very calm and virtuous mind, and therefore give great comfort to those around us as well. So it's a gift we can offer others at that time. So thank you very much.